The first believes that Palestinians are a people with real history, hopefully most of us here, that needs to be understood and needs to be narrated on its own terms. The second, which of course is a standard Western media narrative, and not just the media narrative, the narrative that many of our peers often subscribe to, believe that Palestinians are in fact without much history and without ultimately meaningful history, and that they just intrude periodically and violently upon our consciousness in the most shocking and demonic way. It could have been the PLO decades ago, today it's Hamas. To those who believe that Palestinians have no history, no humanity, and no context worth talking about or thinking about, I really don't feel I have much to say. No amount of facts, all the facts that we heard today, all these extraordinary facts, the situation in Gaza, the health situation, the Fanonian interpretation, what Samir said, what Keith said, no amount of facts is going to persuade somebody who deep down is convinced that the genocidal violence now being perpetrated against the Palestinians in Gaza and in Palestine is justified in any way whatsoever. If they believe that, it doesn't matter how many times and how many facts and how many interpretations we give them, it's not going to change anything. Yesterday, of course, we heard it was 900 Palestinians slaughtered. Today, the number, as we heard, is well over 1,000, including, as we heard, 400 children. And tomorrow, the toll will be even greater. No matter how many Palestinians are killed, these killings will be repeatedly justified in a narrative framework that always begins with a terrorist attack out of the blue on innocent Jewish Israelis. In other words, the mainstream, conventional, narrative framework prohibits, discourages, in fact penalizes even thinking about, let alone insisting upon, that the collective experience and history of millions of Palestinians matters deeply, that their trauma, the daily violence and terror that they endure, the apartheid that they live with, and the calculated inhumane Israeli siege of Gaza with Egyptian state complicity that pushes them to early death are all vital aspects of understanding. But the main scaffolding of this tendentious narrative is an ethical and political double standard that justifies this early Palestinian death. The double standard holds that some history matters, some lives matter, and thus some people are worthy of empathy and compassion, active empathy and compassion, and others, namely the Palestinians, are quite literally dehumanized, erased, or at best thought of as contaminated beings. It's always dangerous to mention, in some circles, or to be associated with Palestinians. Yet if one were to accept the fundamentally and preposterously obvious notion, to me at least, and I know to most of you, in fact to all of you I hope, that Palestinians are human and have a meaningful history, we can begin the crucial work of education and emancipation, or at least continue, because many people before us have done this work, continue the crucial work of education and emancipation at what should be an obvious thing to do at a university like ours. Suffice it to say that the entirety of this conflict has its origins in three key undeniable facts, and I'm a historian, so permit me. First, political nationalist Zionism was dreamed up in 19th century Europe. And the dream was to create a pure ethno-religious nationalist state, a Jewish state. And it was dreamed up in racist and anti-Semitic Europe. Zionism, and this is a point that cannot be emphasized enough, did not emerge among the Jewish communities of the Middle East. It emerged in Europe. And that tells us a lot about this history and the meaning of Zionism. So it did not emerge from the Jewish communities or the Muslim communities or the Christian communities in the Middle East, where there was a long, long history, a millennium of interaction and coexistence. It emerged in Europe. Second, Palestinians, of course, as has been said here time and again, and as everyone here knows probably, were and remain the indigenous population of Palestine. This is, again, a basic fact. The Zionist leaders, the original Zionist leaders, almost all came from Europe. Again, these are the most basic and obvious facts that should tell us everything that we need to know. When people say, who is indigenous and who's not, just remember those facts. Palestinians are the indigenous population of Palestine who confronted these European Zionists with a huge problem. This is the second fact. Not only are they indigenous, but of course they're on the land, which we've heard a lot about. So how then do you create a Jewish state if you have this massive, large non-Jewish, Muslim and Christian, in other words, Arab majority on their own land? Third, and that's the third fact, the native Palestinians were, as we know, of course, ethnically cleansed in 1948 to make way for a Western-backed Jewish state. The West supported this Jewish state, as Hatem just mentioned, partly, at least theoretically, to make amends for a long history, a real history of Western anti-Semitism. But they did so deliberately and methodically at the expense of the Palestinians. This is one of the great moral travesties of the 20th century, the idea that Western countries and societies and cultures make amends for their anti-Semitism at the expense of another people. All current events, every single interpretation of current events stems from an understanding of these key facts. If you understand those facts and that history, you'll interpret the current events in a particular light. And to that, of course, there's a fourth. Palestinians who have dared to resist their dispossession and colonization, of which we've heard a lot this evening, have always been demonized, whether they are pacifists or militants, writers or activists, professors or students, secular or religious, literate or illiterate, young or old, in the West or in the Middle East. And the form of demonization matters. You see, because Palestinians have always been represented as a shadowy people without history, without meaningful history, the Zionists and their enthusiastic backers and supporters in the West have imagined a fantastical history for them. Not the history of them and their lived experience as Palestinians, as an ordinary people on their own land. No, a different kind of fantastical history that Israel and its Western backers have created, which is basically to say that the Palestinians have no history, and insofar as they have any meaning in contemporary politics, it's that they are anti-Semites. They are the modern day anti-Semites. The bitterness of this irony is stunning to me, and I'm sure to many of you. The occupied, colonized, brutalized, stateless people who were part of a Middle East with no history of European-style racial anti-Semitism, because that, of course, is a European phenomenon. These people and their descendants are compared to Nazis, even though they have no state and they're not part of that European history of racism. And why are they doing that? Because they dare resist their own dispossession and their occupation and oppression. Yet the ethno-religious nationalist state that has its origins in 19th century Europe, and that has today a governing party, at least a coalition, correct me Sam if I'm wrong, called Jewish Power, and that has encouraged, as Hatem mentioned, actual pogroms against defenseless Palestinians in the West Bank over the past year before our eyes. We all remember these events, that openly boasts that it is not the state of all its citizens, but only of the Jewish people in a multi-religious land that formally rejects constitutional equality because there is no constitution, that flattens, as we are seeing, even as I speak, flattens entire neighborhoods in Gaza in response to what they call terrorism, that speak of Palestinians as, quote, human animals, and long before Israeli leaders talked about Palestinians as cockroaches, as a whole, as two-legged beasts. I mean, there's a whole sort of history of this. This state, we are told here, is a state that we are expected, and we are commanded, in fact, to express full and total solidarity with, not with people, but with the state. Not with people, because of course, Israel in the mind of the West was founded in this imagination, was founded to make amends for a profound history of anti-Semitism. Never mind the fact that the Palestinians had no part in that history of anti-Semitism. Because of course, the Palestinians, as I've said time and again, had been relegated to the annals of peoples of the global South, the peoples without significant or meaningful history. And this perverse logic has its obvious consequence. All of us, or at least many of us, I know everyone here on this table at this podium has experienced this. If you support Palestinian liberation, if you advocate, this is the perversity of where we are, if you advocate for equality and decency and dignity and freedom, you are almost certainly going to be smeared with the charge of anti-Semitism. So in this Orwellian moment, I'm most concerned So we're at the end here. With our amazing undergraduate students, honestly, and the graduate students who advocate for equality and decency and dignity and freedom. And I want to honestly to recognize these students because they, far more than me as a professor, they are the ones, including the staff here and the precarious faculty, all of whom are facing extraordinary intimidation, harassment, doxing, and even, I would say, terror. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happening at UC Berkeley and across this country. I am dismayed, honestly, by campus leadership, which just propagated yet again the idea in the last statement of yesterday that Palestinian life explicitly as Palestinian life, and therefore the present and future of Palestinian, Muslim, and allied students are essentially not as important as the lives of others. It's extraordinary to me. So I'm talking about, of course, the campus statement issued by UC Berkeley, let alone the entire UC system, which does not actually mention everything that we've heard today. It's amazing. The inability, the refusal of people in power to actually, in a university campus, to actually just talk about what a university should be, which is a place to talk about facts and history and meaning and ethics and courage. And so rather than insisting that campus is a place of learning, often difficult learning, and a place, the beautiful thing about a place like UC Berkeley, like every other campus in this country, in theory, is that we have the ability to have intellectual dissent and we have the right to physical safety. I mean, that's what we're here to be thinking and doing and to learn. It's just not right to me or acceptable or just that any young student, I'm thinking particularly of Roa, but every other student here who's gone through this, that these people have to sort of do their work and worry about the terror that comes their way. Just because they believe in the basic idea of freedom, just because they believe in Palestinian freedom, they believe in human equality. And so I have to say, I have nothing but admiration for these students, nothing but admiration for their courage. And whatever I can do as a tenured professor, and I'm not sort of making myself out to be anything but just a professor who teaches here, but I will never apologize, nor should you. I hope you never will apologize for supporting Palestinian freedom or for expressing total solidarity with a maligned and brutalized people, because the whole point of what is happening today is to silence you and intimidate you and to sort of to smear you with the charge of anti-Semitism. It is so appalling. So again, thank you, everyone.
First of all, I'd love to thank the professors who were very responsive, did not take any time or hesitation to respond to our request to serve on this panel as educators and informers, and to Hiba as well. And also to extend the concern and the admiration of my work to the fellow organizers that were also extremely active, and BFP and everybody else who's been very involved in this. And also to appreciate everybody showing up and staying for this 2-hour-long information session. And I hope that you guys take away the deconstruction of the colonial language and you implement that in the way that you perceive the media, in the way that you perceive information in regards to minority representation, and specifically with Palestine. Thank you again, everyone, for showing up, and thank you to all our professors and to all our speakers.